What is going on, Revolution Church? It is so good to be with each and every one of you this week that is joining us online. Do us a favor, hit that share button, tag somebody underneath, hit that like button or that heart button. This weekend has been amazing at Rev Church. And before we even get started, I just got to say this. I want to say thank you to you guys because you allow me every single year when I need to take time off. And I don't get a whole lot of criticism for it. I don't have people saying, why are you off, blah, blah, blah. In fact, you guys probably encouraged me to take more time off than any church I've ever been in, and I appreciate that so much. We do 3 services every single weekend here, and so I just want to tell you, thank you for your support, for the staff and the leadership just to be healthy here. And my man, Jeff, who is our Rev Men's Minister, last week brought the word for us, opened up our series Meaningless, which is on the book of Ecclesiastes. And y'all, I'm telling you, he absolutely crushed it. I ended up being here because I just like to come to church. I mean, I know I was on vacation and everything's supposed to be off, but I was like, man, I want to go to church. I want to go sit in a service. And I got to hear him preach it live. And man, Jeff did an incredible job bringing the word last week. So accurate, so good. Just a great way to open up this series. I've told you guys this before, that the team that God has put together with me is just incredible. When I'm gone, I don't worry about anything anymore. Students on Wednesdays, kids ministry, production, it doesn't matter what it is, the finances, everybody does such a great job. So if you see somebody that you know is on staff, just encourage them because they do such a wonderful job. I also want to update you, number 2, before we get going, on the facility. As you know, we're buying 20 acres of land next to Stone Elementary. If you need more details on it, just ask somebody. If you're watching online, email the church. We'll give you some info on it. I want to encourage you guys to continue to be generous. Last week, we had incredible giving towards the property. We took up $35,370 last week alone. So now we're sitting at $181,749.83. Remember, that's what we've taken up total. But remember, we've got to raise $264,000 total because we're closing on July 1st, and it is not contingent on financing, which means we've got about $80,000 left. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but it's just unbelievable. I mean, what God's done already through His people and your all's generosity blows me away. So again, I'm just going to encourage you. Don't miss the blessing of being a part of this and leaving a legacy in Crossville, Tennessee. Legacy is the word that keeps coming to my mind. When I'm dead and gone, I want the young people in our church to be taking the gospel further than we ever thought possible in my lifetime, okay? I don't want them to be living off the fumes of what we've done, and I know you're like that too. So continue to give and be faithful in your giving. I'm just so appreciative of being a pastor of a church where you guys tithe and you give above and beyond towards the property and different things like that. So just an awesome time to be at Rev Church. Really thankful. Really thankful. Well, we're in week 2 of a series called Meaningless. That's on, quite honestly, this is my favorite book of the Bible, which is the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes is a very interesting book because when you read it, it can kind of be sort of confusing. I heard one preacher explain it like this. You know, I don't know how many of you guys were not good at math in high school. Anybody in here, D, were you good at math? Okay, I wasn't that good at math. And here's why. Because I never understood why, if you could just get the answer with a calculator, why do you need to show all your work, right? And I still have this debate in my house with my wife. I'm like, why do they need to know how to do this when they can just get a calculator and they can figure it out, right? And so I was the one that was always guilty of knowing the answer, but I wouldn't show my work properly, so I always got the answers wrong or got credit marked off, because when you do math, they want to see how you got to the answer. They don't just want to know the answer, right? Well, the Bible has all the answers we need for life, and we all know this. But the book of Ecclesiastes is the showing of the math, if you will, on how we get to those answers. And so it's kind of confusing in some areas, but it does a great job of explaining what meaning is and how you find it. And the phrase meaningless, which is why we called this series Meaningless, is used some 38 times in this book. Two phrases that you need to know. Meaningless used 38 times, and under the sun used 29 times. And essentially, the gist of the book is that everything under the sun on this earth, on this side of heaven, in this world, is meaningless. And so what we need to make sure we're living for is for the next life, when we go to heaven. Last week, Jeff unpacked chapter 1, and he basically told us everything is meaningless. That's how Solomon opened it up, right? What a motivational speech, right? Everything is meaningless. And what he talked about was everything being meaningless because humanity has rebelled against God, and now we live in this cursed world where nothing we build our lives on here in this world will ultimately satisfy us. Well, today in chapter 2, we see that Solomon starts to give his personal testimony based off of chapter 1. And really what we see is, as he's told us everything's meaningless, now in chapter 2, really what we're going to see him talk about, what a perfect scripture and passage for us to land on this week and chapter of the Bible, because it's Memorial Day weekend when the American dream is being lived more than ever. People take off. It's great to memorialize people that have given their lives, but that's not really what it means to most people. What we're going to see him talk about today, though, is the American dream being meaningless. As Solomon gives his testimony, and we're going to see as we go through this book of the Bible that Solomon is going to appear like a scientist that is running experiments with anything and everything he can find in his life in order to try to find purpose and meaning and fulfillment. So we're going to start in chapter 2, and we're going to go through the whole book. And really, if I could title this sermon anything for us in our culture today, it would be this. What we're going to see Solomon talk about is life, liberty, and the pursuit of misery. Okay, so chapter 2, I'm going to go verse by verse through this. I'm going to stop on it, and I want you to hear kind of what he says out the gate, and then consider Solomon's words today. It says this in verse 1. Solomon says, I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. Again, he's running experiments. He's running tests to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Now, before we get going today, I want you to consider something. I've done this before, and I'm sure you've done it as well. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you won the Powerball lottery? Have you ever had discussions with your spouse or in your mind and thought, man, if I won $300 million, I would do this, I would do this, I would buy this, I would give this, I would do this, I'd get my parents this. Man, how cool would that be? Well, what we're going to see through the rest of this chapter is essentially Solomon fulfilling everything you've ever dreamed about when you've been in that scenario in your mind. The first thing he points out is what most describe as hedonism. When he says, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good, what Solomon's speaking of is a word called hedonism. Hedonism defined is trying to find sensual self-indulgence or seeking to find pleasure at whatever cost. O'Donnell said in his commentary on the book of Ecclesiastes, within the house of hedonism are many rooms, and Solomon tries to sleep in them all. Solomon is at this place where he's realized nothing really matters, and if the world is going to end, then I may as well try to have fun until it does end. If I'm going to die, then I may as well just do everything I can to seek pleasure. I may as well eat, drink, and be merry, so to speak. If you've ever heard that old Tim McGraw song, Live Like You Were Dying, this is what Solomon is getting ready to describe he does in his life. You know that song, a guy gets a terminal diagnosis, and he says, I went skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, 2.7 seconds on a bull. So he's living like he's dying is what Solomon's saying. I'm going to do everything I've ever wanted to do in order to try to please myself. And what we're going to see is Solomon starts to medicate himself to distract from his lack of meaning in his life. He knows that under the sun there's no meaning. Everything is meaningless. And so now we're going to see him try to medicate himself in order to deal with that fact. Some scholars point out that at this first verse really probably more realistically and practically describes the fact that Solomon would have hedonistic parties at his house, where he would have all of the, really figuratively and for the time, all of the A-list celebrities from around the world come to his house for a party, feed them the best food, the best filet mignon that you can imagine, and all this stuff. And what Solomon says in this opening verse of chapter 2 is, everything he tried to find to please himself was all meaningless. He says it all proved to be meaningless. Well, then he gets into even more detail about some things that he did in order to try to find meaning. Listen to what he says in verse 2. He says, laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? Again, this is written in what we call Hebrew poetry, so it's kind of hard to understand really the depth of what he's saying. But what he's saying is, hey, I had laughter at my disposal anytime I wanted. I'm the king, and so I had the funniest people on earth available to me anytime. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, man, wouldn't it be cool? Could you imagine? And I'm going to try to be generational here, but could you imagine if living next to your house on call whenever you wanted to laugh was available your favorite comedian? Like, could you imagine, like, if Eddie Murphy or Adam Sandler or Chris Rock, or one of my favorites was Chris Farley. Could you imagine if you had like a spare bedroom in your house, and anytime you got down, you said, hey, Chris Farley, I need you to come in here, tell me a joke, do something goofy, do the van down by the river, routine, so that I can laugh and be let up? Could you imagine Kevin Hart lives in your pool house or something like that? Or maybe you recognize these guys. I mean, surely in Crossville, Tennessee, everybody recognizes these guys, the Blue Collar Comedy Tour, right? Larry the Cable Guy, you might be a redneck guy, is available to you anytime. You don't have to pop a DVD in. No, they can be there live. Wouldn't that be awesome, y'all? Solomon says no. It's all meaningless. People always say laughter is the best medicine, but Solomon's like, that's not true. In fact, what we see in our culture a lot is the funniest people have the darkest lives. The funniest people tend to be the ones that take their own life. And so Solomon finds no meaning in this laughter. See, laughter can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Laughter is not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Well, Solomon leaves the comedy club, and in the next verse we see he heads to the bar when he says, I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, and my mind still guided me with wisdom. Now there's some to debate as to what Solomon means here when he says he embraced folly with wine. Some would say that he was a drunk and he just got drunk and debaucherous, was an alcoholic at some point in his life. And then some would say, well, no, he said he still had wisdom guiding his mind, so he was just a wine connoisseur and he liked to drink the best wines and he had the best ones available. I honestly think it's both. I think he did both. And what he found was when he did both of these things and he had whatever he wanted to drink on hand. I mean, can you imagine? This is kind of what Solomon's saying in our version today. If you enjoy a beer, every craft beer you could ever imagine on tap in your home. And anytime you wanted to try that favorite beer you have or that one you had when you were on vacation, it was available to you and you could take a drink anytime. Could you imagine, like, how cool would it be if you had the smoothest, most expensive wine, if you're into that, and you're like, man, I could have a glass of the greatest wine in the world available to me anytime. How great would that be? Maybe you don't drink because you stay away from alcohol, because I don't drink and I don't want to have anything to do with it, and maybe you're prone to alcoholism, right? Maybe you don't go anywhere near that, but imagine this. Imagine it's just your favorite drink. Imagine in your fridge you have fully stocked Mountain Dew anytime you want and never have to worry about running out. You don't got to go to the convenience store to get it. It's just there. Imagine you've got sweet tea, Southern sweet tea. You know what I'm talking about? The kind of sweet tea that you can like pour in your car and run your car off of. You know what I'm saying? That kind that just makes your teeth automatically dissolve when you drink it anytime you wanted. On tap, ready for you. How awesome would that be? This is Solomon's life, and Solomon says, no, it's not that awesome. It's not that awesome. See, alcohol can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Alcohol is not evil in itself until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. He continues, and he says, I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. And he says this, I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. So now Solomon moves into architecture. He says, you know what? I tried to find fulfillment and meaning in building houses. Solomon's house took some 14 years to build. To put that in perspective for you, he was the one that rebuilt the temple, and it took him 7 years to build the house that God stayed in. Twice as long to build his house. And he says, I had the biggest, nicest house ever. I got online and looked up some of the most expensive homes in the world, and I've got a few pictures of them that I want to show you. This first one I'm going to show you is called, I'm going to try to say this, the Villa Les Cedres. And it was built for the King of Belgium in 1830, and it has 14 bedrooms, an Olympic pool, a library, a ballroom, horse stables, everything you could ever imagine, $350 million. Wouldn't it be awesome if you could live in a house like that? Check this one out. This is called the Ellison Estate in Woodside, California. It's on 23 acres. 10 buildings make up this home alone. It's got its own private lake. How awesome would it be to live in a house like that? Check this one out. This is Bill Gates' second home called Xanadu 2.0. It's 66,000 square feet. The artwork on his walls changes at the push of a button, so you can decorate it however you want at the push of a button. How cool would it be, and how great would it be to live in a house like that? The last one, I'm going to show you this one. This one that we're going to show you is Michael Jordan's beach home. This is actually the house that they filmed the documentary The Last Dance in. Could you imagine how incredible it would be if you could just live in a house like this? How great that would be? Solomon says, no. It's all empty. Yeah, if I could just have a bigger house. No. Solomon says, no. Houses can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. House is not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Getting the cycle here. He then talks about agriculture. He says, I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit and trees in them. He's talking about how he tried to find fulfillment in agriculture, in his gardens. Speaking of massive houses like we just did, the closest one to us that's one of the most world-famous homes that there is in the entire world is the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. And at the Biltmore Estate, one of the things that it is the most famous for is its gardens. And so we've got a picture we're going to put up on the screen. Typically in the fall time when things start changing colors, they do stuff like this. Look how beautiful that is. That's incredibly amazing, right? I mean, just beautiful gardens, beautiful agriculture. How cool would it be to have a garden like that you could just walk out into and find peace and tranquility and see God's masterpiece and beauty? Solomon says, no. Solomon says, I tried that. See, gardens can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Agriculture is not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Well, then he gets a little more practical when he says in the next verse, I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I think practically for us, what he's talking about is, hey, I had pools to swim in, to have parties at, to hang out at. They were incredible, you know. And it reminds me of a quote by Jerry Seinfeld that says we're all looking for little islands of relief in a painful existence. That's what Solomon says he's doing. Man, I had more pools than you could bark at or whatever. Like, it's amazing the pools that I had. I've got some pictures of some pools that I thought were really cool in researching for this sermon series. We've got different ones. Look at this first one that we're going to put up for you. How awesome is that? Now look at this one. I think this is actually connected to the beach. How cool would it be? I mean, if we just had a pool like this, y'all, wouldn't it be incredible if you could just go home and walk into the backyard in a pool like this? Check out this third one. I think we got 4 of them total. Incredible, right? Look at this fourth one. Incredible. If you had a pool like that, how cool would that be? Wouldn't that be awesome? Solomon says, no. This is awesome for a little while, but then it was empty. See, Solomon's telling us pools can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Pools are not evil until you try to make the pool the solution for life's problems. He then says a verse that can be kind of confusing when he says, I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. What he's talking about here is servants in his life. Think about this. How great would this be? This is what Solomon's saying. Could you imagine, how many times have you ever thought if we just had a maid that could clean our house for us? How great would it be? If I just had somebody that could do my laundry and fold it and put it into my kids' chest of drawers for them, how amazing would that be? How awesome would it be if you had a personal stylist every single day that did your makeup for you, that fixed your hair for you, that could give you a shave, guys? Hopefully not the girls, right? But give you a shave, guys, with a straight razor, and then, how great would that be if you had someone that mowed your grass for you and you didn't have to worry about it anymore and did your landscaping for you? If you had people to serve you in all these different ways, man, wouldn't it just change your life? Solomon says, no, man. I found emptiness in it all. People serving me momentarily distracted me from pain, but it didn't overcome it. Servants are not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. He then starts to talk about animals and says, I also own more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I've got some friends in the church that have some horses, and they love those horses. And could you imagine, I don't know if you're an animal person or not, but what if you had, stables and stables of Kentucky Derby ready horses that you could ride one anytime you wanted? One of our staff members, Brandy, who is one of our main administrators here at the church, she's a goat mom. She loves goats. And if it was up to Brandy, she'd have about 5 million goats, and she'd know every single one of their names because she absolutely loves goats. So could you imagine if you were a goat person being able to get any goat you wanted, having places to, knowing their names and being able to feed them and tell people to go get them so you can pet them and all that stuff? How awesome would that be? Maybe you're a dog person in here and you dress your dog up in little bitty sweaters. Could you imagine if you could just have any dog you want and save every stray you've ever loved? Wouldn't that give you fulfillment to be able to save all the kittens out there that are at the kill shelters that are going to be, man, that'd be amazing. And here Solomon says, no. I tried it, y'all. I tried it. It was empty because animals can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Animals are not evil until you try to make them the solution for life's problems. Then he talks about his riches and says, I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. We heard Jeff tell us last week that Solomon was worth, in our money today, over $2 trillion, by far the richest man that has ever lived in history. So Solomon owns all the Bitcoin. He's got all the Dogecoin. He's got all the gold. He's got all the cash. He's got all the currency. 2 Chronicles chapter 9 tells us that silver was as common as stone. They wouldn't even use silver to make silverware in Solomon's house and in his day. That's how worthless it was. Can you imagine if you had that much money, that many riches? Man, maybe that would solve some things in your life, but Solomon says it doesn't solve nothing. It's empty. It's meaningless. Money can momentarily distract us from pain, but it can't overcome it. Money is not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Then he throws another line in and he says, I acquired male and female singers. This is kind of weird because after he talks about riches, he says, I had singers available to sing to me anytime I wanted to hear good music. How cool would it be to do that, right? How cool would it be to have your favorite band live on site where you had built a concert hall and Adele lives next to you, and anytime you wanted to hear music, you don't get your iPod out. You don't have to wait on a concert months away. You could say, hey, Adele, go to the concert hall. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I want to hear some music. How cool would that be? Maybe it's not Adele for you. Maybe it's like New Kids on the Block or Justin Bieber or something crazy like that. If it is, we're praying for you. Maybe Elvis, Johnny Cash, whatever. I'm trying to be generational here and applicational, right? Like, could you imagine how great would it be if you could just walk into something like that and hear that kind of music live anytime, live concert anytime you want? Man, that'd change your life, right? Solomon says, no. Music's great, but ultimately he found it to be empty. Can momentarily distract us from pain, but it can't overcome it. Music is not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Then he says he had a harem and all the delights of a man's heart, so he turns to sex. Jeff told us last week, 700 wives, 300 concubines. 300 concubines, if you want to know what a concubine is, it's a stripper girlfriend. She's there just to please him sexually. And so every sexual desire he ever wanted to play out, every fantasy he ever wanted to know, Solomon does it. And what he's telling us is, it's all empty. Hugh Hefner, Wilt Chamberlain's got nothing on Solomon, and Solomon says it's empty. See, sex can momentarily distract us from pain, but it cannot overcome it. Sex is not even evil. It's got to be in the right place. It's not evil until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. Solomon says in verse 9, says, I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. He says, my heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Solomon says, I've tried every hedonistic desire, every fantasy, every desire, anything I could think of, I've tried it. Daniel and Jonathan Aiken said in their commentary on this particular passage, Solomon had the most success, the best houses, the most possessions, the richest lifestyle, the most sophistication, the finest wines, the most incredible parties and feasts, the greenest lawns, the best servants, more money than we could possibly imagine, military fame, popularity, endless entertainment, and as much sexual pleasure as anyone could ever indulge in. And he says it was all empty. It led to nothing but brokenness. The point is this: Solomon he outdid anything that we could ever even imagine. And what Solomon is telling us is every bit of it was empty. Verse 12, he starts to talk about education and his knowledge when he says this, then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. So he's not saying wisdom's bad. It's better. Light's better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fools walk in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise must die. Solomon says, all the wisdom I had, all the degrees I had, so to speak, all the education. He went to Harvard. He has his doctorate degree. He's super smart. He's got all this going on, and he's going to speak extensively later in this series on wisdom. But he says, I found it all to the same end. I'm going to die with it, and it's meaningless. It's empty. Solomon's like, being smart can momentarily distract us from pain. Hey, it's great when you graduate and you get a degree. There's nothing evil about it until you try to make it the solution for life's problems. So he comes to this result as a result of all this. When Solomon says, so I hated life because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish, yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days their work is grief and pain. Even at night their minds do not rest. Man, every single one of us can totally relate to what Solomon's saying. I work hard all day. I can't even sleep at night because I'm so stressed out, so freaked out about everything going on around me. What is the point? He says, this too is meaningless. Solomon is pointing out everything he's went through in this chapter was all him trying to medicate from the fact that he's recognizing that he lives in a broken world, where everything he does in this world, he will never find fulfillment in the things of the world. He's pointing out really what we all do, that every single one of us tries to medicate ourselves with these dopamine shots that come through different things. Solomon has talked about some of the ones he's tried, but let's talk about the ones all of us struggle with. Man, if we could just take a trip, that's what's going to get us by. That's not nothing wrong with that. Some of them are even evil. Man, I just need that dopamine hit of pornography in my life in order to make it. I'm a shopaholic, and if I can just find one more sale, if I can just buy more clothes, then everything will be okay. If I can just get more Instagram likes, if I could just get more people to follow me, then everything will be okay. And Solomon's finding out everything we see that Jesus talked about. Don't store your treasure up here on earth. Store it in heaven. You're never going to find purpose because you were made for something not of this world. Don't gain the whole world and lose your soul. Solomon closes this passage with hope for us because he tells us where we can find meaning and what life's all about in these last three verses when he says in verse 24, a person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and listen, here's the key, find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God. For without Him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases Him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, He gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Solomon tells us the key to fulfillment, joy, and meaning in life is contentment. Being pleased with where God has you, what He has you doing, and finding fulfillment in this life through Jesus. Contentment is the key to life. Justin Bieber said in his Christian album that he put out less than a year ago, I actually really dig it. I really don't listen to Justin Bieber that much, but this album is actually really good. He wrote a song called We're in This Together, and this is what he said in the song. I've had everything in life that people strive for, just to ask the question, what are we alive for? What do you believe, and what do you agree with? What would you die for? Is there a reason? What is the meaning? What do we cry for? The Biebs is right in line with Solomon here, trying to figure out what is the meaning of life. If you don't know who Justin Bieber is or don't like him, I've got another example for you. There's a guy by the name of Dave Mustaine who is now a Christian, but he started out as a rock and roll guitarist, and he was in the band Metallica. Well, Metallica ended up kicking him out of the band. I know you know who Metallica is, one of the most popular bands in the world. But they kicked him out of the band early on, and he started another band called Megadeth. Megadeth sold 38 million records worldwide, earned platinum certification in the United States for 6 of its 15 studio albums, and received 12 Grammy nominations. Dave Mustaine was quoted as saying several times that he never could find meaning in his life, and he never was happy, and he never was joyful because of one thing. Because when he looked at his life, he saw himself as a failure. There was no contentment. Because his band Megadeth, couldn't measure up to the band that he'd been kicked out of, Metallica. Megadeth sold 38 million albums. Metallica sold more than 125 million albums. So he felt like a failure. There was no contentment. Anyone in this world would say, 38 million records, that's unbelievable. To him, it was all meaningless. It's exactly what Solomon's saying here. Tom Brady, greatest football player that's ever lived. I mean, you can't even argue it now. He's won so many Super Bowl rings, something like 9 or 10 Super Bowls or something like that. Greatest quarterback. I used to argue that Peyton Manning was better, but you can't even argue it anymore. He is the GOAT when it comes to playing football. Listen to what Tom Brady says about his life. Why do I have the Super Bowl rings and still think there is something greater out there for me? I mean, maybe a lot of people would say, hey, man, this is what it is. I reached my goal, my dream, my life. Me, I think, God, it's got to be more than this. I mean, this can't be what it's all cracked up to be. Now, before you start thinking that this only applies to people with many, many amounts of money that can do whatever they want, I want you to just consider for a moment some of the things that we say all the time. If you've ever said, if we could just get this, then we'd be happy. If I just had this, if I had a bigger house, if we could just get a car that didn't break down all the time, if I could just get my wife to listen to me, if I could just get a promotion at work and get some respect, if I just could make $10,000 more a year, then everything would be all right. If you've ever been guilty of thinking, we really need blank, then you're guilty of doing the exact same thing. And you're going to find out one day what Solomon is finding out. That all those blanks we fill with all the different things are meaningless. Are meaningless. See, our quality of life in America is higher than it's ever been. But our contentment with our lives is lower than it's ever been. I'll close with this and tell you this. This is really the summary of what I believe Solomon is saying. You and everyone you know are going to be dead very soon. And in the short amount of time between here and there, you better get your priorities straight. Don't get to the end of your life and regret most of all that you chased the things that led to absolutely no contentment. Chase after Jesus, follow His word, and find contentment in where He has you in your life. Let's pray. Lord, we love you. We thank you so much for today. I thank you for every single person that is here, God. I just pray for our church that we take the book of Ecclesiastes and we apply it to our lives, and that we find contentment in our identity in who you are and who you've made us to be. I pray that we wouldn't chase after the wind, after meaningless things, after an American dream that isn't bad in itself, but if it's what you base your life on, it's going to lead to tragedy and pain. I pray for the people in here that need deliverance from the dopamine hits in their life, that every time something goes wrong, they look for a drug. Every time something goes wrong, they go spend money and get more debt for something. Every time something goes wrong, they turn to alcohol. Every time something goes wrong, they think a bigger house is going to fix it, God. I pray that they would turn to the only thing that can give us contentment, and that is the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for us. We love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thanks so much for joining us online. We love you guys, and we'll see you soon.